to start thinking about the overall picture. The final exam was a way to be on the whole course, and so we want to start thinking about that sweep. So we started over here in roughly the 1600s, where actually the world was about at the same level. The Europeans were important, but on the other hand, China was still a very advanced civilization. The Muslim world was doing very well. In the Americas, the Aztecs and the Incas had just gone down before the Spanish, but basically, things were on a fairly even level. Okay? But with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, very major change in what the West had going for it, the development of substitution of steam power and coal power and water power for human power meant tremendously more energy could be gotten out to produce things, and that led to all kinds of technological developments, with the result that the West rapidly begins to pull ahead of the rest of the world, and eventually, as you know, is going to come to the point to dominate them. And at the same time, we did not read in the book the chapter on the French Revolution, but whereas in most of the world you had a very small upper class ruling over everyone else, usually headed by a king or something like that, starting with the French Revolution, you start the idea of people ought to elect their leaders, people ought to have say in what goes on, and that, of course, will bring about the movement towards democracy in contrast with the movement towards autocratic government. Okay? At the same time, the French Revolution was so important because before that point, it was this king attacking that king and attacking that prince, and each one of you had armies that you had forced to come together, and they fought for you because generally they got paid, they hoped, okay? But there wasn't any specific sense of, I'm fighting for France, I'm fighting for England. It was more or less, I'm fighting because my king is on the fight, okay? Instead, with the French Revolution, where France is invaded by armies from Austria, from Prussia, from England, there's a sense of, we Frenchmen need to fight for France. Of course, that is the beginning of nationalism, which I hope you recall is one of the driving forces in history from that point on. So you've got these two key things that are coming out of the West, nationalism and the Industrial Revolution, which really are going to revolutionize the whole world. And since the West is the first one going in that area, it's able first to move more and more towards unification of various countries that had only been geographical areas. And you saw that the Germans and Italians put together the French, the Spanish, the English, having been quite a bit ahead of them in that area, right? And then at the same time, what we've got is the Europeans having become established, powerful technological countries, and their daughter country, the United States, then wind up going out and dominating the rest of the world. And so we had that whole phase of imperialism, where they take over Africa, they essentially control the economies of Latin America, they take over India, one of the largest countries in the world. They have spheres of influence in China, so the Chinese, again, are appear to be independent, but their government is a paper tiger, and the Europeans do whatever they want, okay? And so as you approach 1900, the Europeans dominate and rule the world, the Europeans and the United States, and other European-oriented colonies like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Okay? The West rules the world, okay? However, as you certainly should recall, the West, unfortunately, winds up with a civil war among itself, World War I, where the democratic end of the West, the French and the British, fight the more autocratic end, Germany and what's left of Austria-Hungary, okay, with the result that the Europeans are so evenly matched that essentially they destroy all this that they've built up over all those years, okay? The United States, and well, especially the United States, comes out at the end of the war as the great superpower in the world, okay, accepting that it's unhappy with what it saw in Europe, and so it withdraws, okay. On the other end of the scale, you've got the Russians, where the Tsar's autocratic regime had collapsed, and you get the rise of a new approach to things, communism, which theoretically is that democratic idea carried to the very extreme, where the poor and the ordinary people really ought to share everything, and the leadership group either participates with them as an equal or else is destroyed. Okay, and so you've had the wiping out of the Russian noble class, the assassination of the Tsar, the killing of the Tsar and his family, and Russia embarks on communism. Right. At that point, the Europeans had done enough damage to themselves in World War I that it's very hard for them to recover. The United States enters this great technological boom where radios, cars, washing machines, things like that really start to be produced. The American economy booms. You should remember the big flaw in there, though, that the people who run and manage the corporations are getting a much bigger share of the profits than the workers. And of course, the economy booms when there's people out there going to be able to buy things, and workers can't quite buy what's being produced, so they wind up getting credit for the installment plan, and that's great. That extends their buying power through the 1920s, which are boom years over here, and it enables us to give loans to Germany, which is in a hole. Okay, they use that to pay their reparations. It looks like Europe is coming back on its feet, excepting that eventually there's just a limit on how much credit you can get, and when people turn off your credit, then you stop buying things. Then people start wondering, people won't stock. What is the sense of having stock in this company when how's it ever going to sell any stuff? The consumers out there seem kind of soft. The smart guys start pulling the money out, and that begins to avalanche that is the stock market crash. And since our loans are what's keeping Europe going, Europe follows us into that crash, and so you have the 1930s, which were generally bad times in the European world. Bad enough so that people are willing to turn to very, very different approaches to things. So in the United States, Franklin Roosevelt's the New Deal is a very, very big change in our past. American government, up until the New Deal in the 1930s, was a very tiny thing. You rarely felt the influence of your government, okay? Unless there were a war, then you got drafted and stuff like that. But the government was way out there. Your state government was what basically handled things for you. But the Depression was way too big for the state governments, and so the federal government really rose with all these new programs, including the first New Deal, where we got this idea of the government requiring business, labor, and government to come to standards, to set limits for production, stuff like that. The government really, really controlling the economy. The government using Keynesian ideas, even though Roosevelt doesn't really understand what Keynesian means, still that's what he's doing. The government pumping in massive amounts of money to keep the economy afloat and making jobs in the hope that the economy gets itself together again. Raising the federal debt that we've never seen before, adding important federal programs that are vital to your life, like Social Security, like the various TVA, where the area around Tennessee, Kentucky really is remade into very powerful new areas. These are things, again, that right now as a country we're arguing that. We've got the big case going on in Washington right now about Obamacare. Well, that really is applying some of the New Deal type ideas in the area of medicine. Okay, should the government be there to require you to have a health policy so that everybody's covered? Europe, remember, had universal medical coverage all the way back to Bismarck in 1888. Okay, in America, there's that sense that government should not be so big, so intervening, so powerful. And depending on if you listen to the Tea Party, right now they're saying that this is one more intrusion of big government. If you're listening to the liberal end, they're saying people are going to need to have this health care, and the only way to provide it is through some sort of national insurance situation. So we're seeing one more, what may be a big jump. Medical care in the United States is about 16% of the economy, and as the government gets into regulating that, that's a very powerful issue. Needless to say, different people have different feelings about the subject, and you ought to keep your eyes open on things like that, because it will be one of the major factors in the election in November. Right? I think people are kind of blind when they imagine that we can't, that we ought not to fix our medical system because we're paying for it right now, whatever the score is. You know, if you don't have insurance and you get bad or hurt, you go to the hospital can't turn you away. Okay? That means you're gonna run up big bills, and the hospital is supposed to eat that. Of course the hospital is supposed to eat that, and that's why you hear these things about, you went to the hospital and you had an aspirin, and they charge you $10 the aspirin, okay? That's not they're charging you $10 the aspirin, that's that they're covering people who didn't have insurance, and if someone's gonna pay, it's gonna be you. So one way or the other, it's gonna be paid. The Obama plan is that you would have to have insurance, and therefore you wouldn't see that. And so, I mean, these are major issues. Unless we were willing to say, you know, if someone doesn't have insurance and they were in a hospital and they had a big problem, well, you know, that's their tough luck, go home and die. And theoretically, that's what real free enterprise is. You make your decision, and you know, you live or die by what you've decided. Okay, so these are things that are important in the United States. Okay, but back to the 1930s, the same way the United States really develops big government to help get it out of the problems of the 1930s. So does Italy first in 1922, and then Hitler in the 1930s, where Hitler builds a huge army and seeks to, quote, correct the problems that he felt that Germany suffered in World War I, right? And that, of course, leads to World War II, which is a world war. You should know why the Japanese were also involved in that. But that takes us to 1945, where Germany is completely crushed. Italy is also completely crushed. Britain is drained completely. It's quote a winner, but on the other hand, economically, it's very much hurting. Okay, and in addition, the British people sort of realize that they need to concentrate on putting themselves together and working on their internal problems rather than trying to run an empire. And so it will start to see its empire fall apart. I think we talked last time about India with Gandhi and the African countries slowly gaining independence. We talked about that, right? So you know, Britain kind of has faded into second-rate status. The French, having gone down very quickly by the Germans, again, they're very weak and they're going nowhere. Okay. With the result that nationalism is spreading across the world. It started in Europe, and now the African states feel nationalistic. Well, at least they feel they ought to be free from Britain. Okay? In all these places, it's always the intellectuals, that top 5% or so, that is doing all the driving. Okay, whereas you know, most people in those countries still didn't have too much education, so there's a limit to what they can do. Okay. India, same thing. India right now, the top roughly 20% is in the modern world and is very advanced, but you've got villages where people are still living the way they lived in the 1700s. Okay? It takes a long time for ideas to filter down. But nonetheless, the people at the top feel that they want to be the ones running their country, not somebody else. So the European powers are pretty well broken, leaving on the one hand the United States, which emphasizes the democratic tradition. You want to stop and ask yourself sometime whether your tradition can be all that democratic when pretty well the educated people, the college people, the bankers, the old upper crust basically still do control things. And if you don't have money, your chances of running for president are pretty slight. Okay? Even at local offices, when to run for a senator or something can easily cost you a couple $1 million. Okay? How many of you can afford to come up with a couple $1 million to do that? But at least in theory, everybody has some sort of shot at things. If you're a good speaker or something like that, you might convince others to give money to your campaigns. If you notice right now, Newt Gingrich has been given something like $5 million by somebody who thinks highly of him, which is reason to get him to stay in the race. Santorum, who doesn't have very much financial backing, is getting a lot of money from conservative religious people, and that's keeping him in there. So I mean, you know, it's not a perfect democracy, but it's kind of a democracy. Okay. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ledger, you had the Soviet Union, where totalitarianism is the big rule, and where you were really individualized, and of course to shut your mouth and not talk about anything, otherwise you'll be killed, right? And of course both systems are very fearful of each other, right? One of the problems of the West is that we tended to see the Russians, the second world, the communist world, as it, and the rest of it was sort of ours to defend. Well, people in the third world who are becoming independent may not necessarily feel that they belong to the Western world, and so as these countries, some of them go quite left wing, there's a sense of the communist world is winning. Well, actually people in those various countries are making some of their own choices about how they think they should be developed. Okay? If you go way back to the first class over here, remember we talked about the two basics, or the three basic systems of government. Okay? On the one hand, the presidential system, where you have a Congress and a president, and they divide power. Okay? And then the totalitarian system, or a king, where somebody gives orders and that takes care of that. And then you have that third way, the British way, the parliamentary system, where the parliament has the head of the country as part of parliament, and the result is it's able to move very, very quickly. Many of these new countries take that kind of system. They go the parliamentary system. So whoever it was that led the fight for independence, that guy tends to become president. His backers tend to be the ones who control parliament, and they can do whatever they want. And they're doing that. Remember, the presidential system works very slowly. We make it a point to block as many things as possible. Before a law actually gets passed, it takes a real lot of struggle. Obamacare is a very major change in American thinking, and it took him 2 years to get that thing through, and only by the skin of his teeth. Now there's a very good chance the Supreme Court is going to strike it down. Okay, I would just pause for a moment to point out that when you think elections don't matter, elections really do matter, because the fact that George Bush, this last Bush, won that election meant that he was able to put 2 Supreme Court justices on, and they're very conservative. And right now, the way the arguments are going, the 4 liberal justices are very much in favor of the Medicare program. It looks like the 5 conservative justices are swinging against it. Okay, and notice it theoretically, when you get on the Supreme Court, you're supposed to be not political anymore. But on the other hand, if I always felt that poor people who go to the bottom are a bunch of lazy assholes, but get up and do some work, and they don't deserve much because they don't get much, okay? Or if I feel, I came out of a very poor situation, I had a struggle, I had to work hard, and I know how tough it is to be at the bottom, okay? Well, just because over here I'm labeled Republican, over here I'm labeled Democrat, and now I'm neutral, and so I'm no longer political, the things that inform my life, okay? You who are, whatever you think you are right now, it's because you went through certain things as you grew up. You had certain experiences that other people didn't, and the label doesn't take care of that. Okay, so the fact that there are 4 liberals and 5 conservatives on the court may well determine where this law goes. Okay, so it's not going to be a nice neutral opinion. Okay, yes, ma'am.
What is the you were talking about some tax law that was made in 1930 or something. And it was the Anti-Induction Act or something that's saying that they can't pass or fail it until there's actually a payment.
That law was made actually in 1867.
Okay.
Right. I'm going to pass a law, okay? And the law is going to say that everybody in Connecticut needs to pay a $500 special tax, okay? Now, the first thing you do if you don't like that is you ask for an injunction. You know what an injunction is? An injunction is stop. You can't do anything until the law is tested in the courts, okay? So it just stops things from happening. So if somebody decides that they want to build a big nuclear power plant right down the road over here, if they've got the clearance and all that, but if you get an injunction that stops them until all of that has gone through all kinds of clearances, which may take 15 years, okay? Well, if you're going to have a law that requires taxes, and I can go and appeal for an injunction, so first a court has to decide whether the law is okay. And in America, the courts take a long time to act. You know, this Obamacare has been a hot deal, and it's 3 years before it got to the Supreme Court. Sometimes things may take many more years than that. Well, you know, are we going to stop the government? So they passed a law back in the 1860s that unless somebody's actually paid a tax, okay, that's what triggers your right to appeal. So you're talking right now about something that doesn't concern you. Now, the question with Obamacare is it a tax or is it a penalty? In case you don't know, if you, any of you from Massachusetts? Massachusetts has basically Obamacare, and it was passed by Romney, of all the strange people. And I spent 2 weekends ago doing the income tax of one of my mathematically incompetent friends who lives in Massachusetts. And you look at Massachusetts tax return, and you have to check off on that whether you're covered by insurance. So if you have Medicare, fine, okay? If those who work for, how many get health insurance where you work? Okay, one person, that's all? Okay, all right. Well, you know, she would check off that she's covered. The rest of you, you need to get insurance someplace, and if you don't, Massachusetts offers, you know, some of you will, yeah, some of you have insurance, have you know, quite a lot of money and still probably pay your own insurance. You have a business, let's say, okay, all right, fine, you're covered, you've got insurance, you check that off. But if you don't have that and you can't get insurance because you don't have much money, then Massachusetts offers a special low-price insurance policy that will cover you, and you got to cover it. If you don't do any of them, then you've broken the law, and there's the equivalent of a fine, which is called a penalty, not a tax. Okay? Now, the question is that a tax or is that a penalty? If it's a tax, okay, then in the Obamacare program, that will not be enforced until, I believe, 2015, which means there's nothing to talk about yet, okay, because this is just a theoretical situation. It's as if you go to a court and you say, if I were to sell this to her for $100, and she knows she's sort of stupid and retarded, okay? Can I do that? Is that fair? Okay? You know, notice I haven't done anything yet. Usually courts don't want to get involved in that. You know, you make up your mind. Okay, so she's bought this now for $100, and I take the money, and now her friend over here says, you know, that was unfair. You really you know, took advantage of this poor simpering idiot up here. You know, now go to court and sue me for having, you know, really taken advantage of someone who was incompetent. Okay, it's a real problem, not theoretical problems. Courts don't like theoretical problems. Okay? Well, if nobody's paid the tax, it's still a theoretical problem. Both the Obama administration and the opponents both argue it is not a tax. Okay? In fact, the Supreme Court had to go out and hire a lawyer to argue it was a tax. Okay? And it looks like it was just a waste of day because everybody agrees that this is not going to be seen as a tax.
Okay.
Since it's not a tax, then they can go on and look at the actual issue, which is should you allow Obamacare or not? Okay? Is it the point is the government expanding too far? Is the government getting so far into your life that it's forcing you to buy something for the first time? Okay, where you're going to have to buy insurance? Okay. To a degree, we do that. For example, in Connecticut, if you want to drive a car, what do you have to have?
Insurance.
Insurance. Okay. But notice you have a choice. You don't have to drive a car. So the government, well, I mean, you know, you can survive taking buses. People do. Okay. And so there is a choice. But with Obamacare, you're going to have to fall in those 4 categories we just talked about. So you're covered by Medicare, you're covered by where you work, you bought your own insurance, or you're eligible for low-price insurance because of your financial situation. There is no other option. You cannot butt out. Right?
What about military drafts?
Oh, they would be in there too. I mean, their employer is the government. Okay?
Yeah.
But the point is, if you're not covered by insurance, you've got to get insurance. Okay? Either you pay for it yourself, you have money, or there's this cheap government policy that will cover you. Okay? But you've got to get it. Okay? Well, is the government's power so great that they ought to be able to do that?
Well, everybody should be insured. It costs more to have people not insured.
Yeah, but all the shoulds in the world don't get away from the issue of can the government force you to do something that, you know,
Somebody's gonna find it unconstitutional.
But when they, but
Is it-
before
they're
they
going to,
still
they will,
have the
but
option of
is-
saying no, they just pay the penalty?
Well, no, my
Well,
question is, is it a yearly?
you know,
Well, I don't know.
well, theoretically, yes. But again, I mean, it's kind of forcing people to do things. This is again, this depends very, very much on who's sitting on the Supreme Court, because all of this stuff was decided back in the Great Depression.
Eventually, somebody's gonna go up there and take a big case and sue the government,
Well, there was a
and then they're
big
gonna
case.
be paid
Okay,
a lot.
again, this not being U.S. history, but I'll just mention that when the government set up pest controls and things like that, one of the great cases involved an egg farmer in New York who was, he only sold eggs locally, okay? And the government had set the price of eggs nationally, right? And he said, I don't sell, this is all based on the Commerce Clause. The United States government has the right to regulate interstate commerce, okay? Well, you know, I'm selling an egg to you. Here, you wanna buy, I'm selling pens. Want to buy this pen for 5 cents? Okay? What does this have to do with national commerce? Nothing, okay? It's just two little people, okay? But if I'm selling these pens for 5 cents, other people may sell these pens for 10 cents. Now they've got to lower their rate, which means little by little has national implications. And so that's the question. How far can the government regulate, okay? And in the from 35 on, like, you know, I mean, Social Security, okay? If you're over if you work, and any of you who work, you have to pay Social Security. You don't have a choice on that, okay? It's exactly the same thing as Medicare, as this Obama health plan, okay? What was seen as okay by liberal judges in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when Democrats tend to be elected president, okay? Now you got the same basic question, but the point is, we now have 5 conservatives on the court and 4 liberals, okay? That may be one of the reasons why 1 or 2 conservatives might vote in favor of this thing, because courts don't like to see laws going like this. You want to be able to kind of understand where things are going. That on the whole, the government does have this power. We've seen it before, therefore we've seen it today. On the other hand, I mean, this court has made dramatic changes. For example, the most horrible of all is the Citizens United case, where you can give as much money as you want to a politician who runs super PACs. Yeah, that overturned a law that was 100 years old. Okay, that there are limits on how much you can give to politicians. Okay, this court interpreted, everybody has the right of free speech. Money is a form of free speech, and if I can stand there and say you ought to vote for X, Y, and Z, okay, certainly I can take my money and buy a radio station that says all day long you can go for X, Y, and Z. And if you don't have money, then get together with people who do have money. That's your problem, okay? Well, that's, again, this is, to me, a pretty extreme court, okay? But the key point is, one of the reasons it's extreme is because people don't stop and think that when you're voting for presidents, you're voting for people who are going to appoint justices to the Supreme Court. And the influence of that, I mean, you all know Brown versus Board of Education? Mm-hmm. Okay, I mean, that case was decided because Earl Warren was Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. And Eisenhower said, to appoint him, that that was the worst mistake he ever made in his life. Okay, that it caused a dramatic revolution in the United States, and something more gradual would have been what Eisenhower would have preferred. Okay, well, when you elect Democrats, you tend to have people who tend to favor the expansion of government. When you elect Republicans, you tend to have people who tend to favor let private enterprise do things, let individuals do things on their own. You decide for yourselves, but it has big impact. Well, anyway, the point is, in most of the third world, they opted for the parliamentary system of government, where the party in control can do whatever it wants, and on the whole, in most of these countries, you had a handful of people at the top who had a fair amount of wealth, power, control, and many, many people at the bottom who were rather poor, which tends to mean that you're going to see laws that look kind of socialistic. Okay? So, World War II ends, and you've got the United States, the democracies, you've got communism offering an approach that involves sharing the wealth and things like that, and then you have a string of problems, which for us look very terrible. Okay? One of the big problems is that within American democracy, in the 1930s, into Depression times, many people were looking for new ideas, new approaches. It does not look as if free enterprise had all the answers, and especially college students started to think about socialism, communism, ideas like that. Okay, Eventually, as the economy straightened out, people tended to, go back to, okay, the American system did manage to work its way out. Roosevelt did manage to kind of put the damper on the Depression, okay? But there are people in the government in Washington who in the 30s had been either in the Communist Party or in communist fronts. You got to understand that communism just is a little to the left of liberals. So the 1930s and 40s, the government is liberal, and so you've got some people who are pretty far liberal. Okay, that causes nervousness as our former ally, the Soviet Union, you remember, moved into the Eastern Bloc nations and had these fake elections, which we really hate. Okay, then you start to see China going communist. Of course, Russia was communist, and Eastern Europe is communist. And it looks like communism is spreading everywhere. Right? One spot that I didn't say much about that we want to mention is Korea over here, right? Which had gotten involved. When the war ended, just like in Germany, Germany was split between the Russians on one side and the Americans on the other side. Okay, Korea, same thing. They just took an arbitrary line, the 38th parallel, which makes no sense. Okay, but it was supposed to be temporary, and the North, which was somewhat larger, was held by a communist leader. The South was held by not really a democratic leader, but somebody who was kind of on our side. Okay, like Vietnam, the communist leader in Korea had been the guy who had led the fight against the Japanese. This is in Vietnam. Ho Chi Minh had led the fight against the Japanese. Okay, probably if an election had been held there, the communists would have won, and all of Korea would have been united, and communists, and that's it. Okay, but as that Cold War picks up, that sense on both sides, Russians and Americans, that we're not friends, we are in competition. Okay, the United States becomes actively involved in improving South Korea's economy, right? With a huge, huge difference. Today, South Korea is one of the richest countries in the world. North Korea can't even feed itself. Okay, so in a way, that's certainly shown that with American aid, good things can happen. Okay, well, in 1953, the American Secretary of State made an unfortunate speech in which he talked about American interests in the Pacific. And he mentioned that we were concerned with, certainly concerned with Japan and the Philippines, Indochina, and Australia. Okay? We left out Korea. Okay, the communist world interpreted that as the United States really didn't give too much concern about Korea. It was, poor, empty, so what? Okay, and the North Koreans invaded South Korea. Okay, that is a war that was a very unpleasant war, and yet when we look back on it today, what a wonderful war, because it was the last war where they were they, and we were we, and everybody could shoot at each other and knew what was going on. Okay? The war was very interesting war. Korea was like this. Okay? They came plowing down, and we were told in South Korea was not expecting anything, and we were really bunched in over here, and the question was, should we just get out and go to Japan? President Truman thinking again in terms of that Truman doctrine that has to do with Greece and Turkey. Remember Greece and Turkey? We would block the expansion of communism there. Okay. Well, here's a tiny little country being attacked, and we should defend it. Truman entrusted General MacArthur, who had been the army leader in World War II in the Pacific. Okay. And MacArthur came up with a truly brilliant plan, which was, instead of fighting all the way back there, okay, let us have a naval landing up here at a place called Incheon, okay, and suddenly our troops are over here, and the North Korean army is completely cut off and shattered, and they're running, okay. At which point, MacArthur and the Americans, by the way, the UN voted to support the South Korean government, okay? Because remember the Security Council, each of the great powers has a veto power there, and they can block it. The Russians were boycotting the United Nations because they were saying it was really just an American front where all these nations that we were giving aid to would automatically vote our way, and so that was it. Since they weren't in the Security Council voted to back a United Nations army, so theoretically, this was a UN army. Okay? There were handfuls of other soldiers there, the Turks, for example, Australians, New Zealanders, but mainly it was the United States and South Korea. Anyway, MacArthur winds up being very victorious, and the North is completely crumbling, okay? But as we're approaching the border of China, okay, that's the Yellow River, the Chinese communists, China remember became communist in 1949, okay, had sent out warnings that they did not want American armies on their borders, and MacArthur said, so what, okay? If the Chinese should act up, what do we have to put them in place? We have atomic bombs, so we'll just bomb them, okay? So MacArthur went up to the very frontier, and suddenly waves of Chinese came down, and all of a sudden we're back down here again, okay? MacArthur said that the United States should use the atomic bomb. Truman said no. MacArthur told the press that Truman was a real jerk, and that obviously he was afraid to fight, okay? At which point Truman did something very important. He fired MacArthur, who was the most popular person in the United States at that point, okay? And it's a very gutsy thing on Truman's part. Again, a very basic point of a democracy is the elected officials have to control. It's not the army that says what goes on, it's the elected officials. Anyway, we fought our way back to around here, right? And when Eisenhower became president, we wound up with a ceasefire. There is no actual peace between North Korea and South Korea, between us and North Korea. It's still a truce zone. Yes, ma'am?
So when was the DMZ put into place?
The DMZ was that ceasefire, okay? It was like 1955 or something like that, where both sides, back off for like a 10-mile strip.
Because my brother was stationed at the DMZ for 15 months, so he saw some interesting things. I didn't know if it was
Yeah, well, that's where it was.
then. All right.
And I remember this because the battles would go on, and there was a place called Heartbreak Hill where every 15 minutes, of course, we captured it, then they captured it, then they captured it, then they captured it.
My brother said every day they have North Koreans at the gates on one side, South Koreans on the other. They throw things back and forth at each other and they riot. And my brother said that the Army sends out warnings saying back off, you need to do this, you need to do that, and they sent out a tank. My brother was there because they had to defend a part of it when they were rioting. They sent a tank out warning them that if you don't back off, and I guess the tank happened to roll over a few civilians and killed them, and then this whole uprising started. So, but he said every day people are there on both sides. They're after each other all the time.
Yeah, there are times when it heats up and times it cools down.
Yeah.
And it's it's very.
So since 1955, they've been doing this on a daily basis?
Yeah.
Oh my God, this is crazy.
Well, who wants to give up power? On either side. Okay. There is a big opportunity right now because there's a new leader there, and nobody knows what's in his head. And so for 2 weeks ago, it looked like things were working
In the
out a little
north,
bit.
right?
In the north, yeah.
Yeah, but now they're
There's a 28
planning.
rule.
The satellite launch, and
Right.
that's gonna
Yeah.
go against the
Right.
agreement they
But
made
even
with
China,
us.
who's an ally of them, has stated that they're nervous about it.
Yeah.
This is what I did my current event on.
Yeah,
Japan
because-
said if anything comes over their country, they're going to shoot it down.
Mm-hmm.
The United States said, they had entered into negotiations to offer them assistance in the way of food, and they suspended that because
Right.
the North is.
The North did develop nuclear power, so the people are starving, but meanwhile they have atomic bombs.
Yeah.
Okay? They have maybe 10, so they're not the world's great power. Pakistan has many, many more, okay? But on the other hand, when George Bush talked about the axis of evil, he said there are 3 bad countries,
Yeah.
okay? North Korea, Iran, and Iraq, okay? North Korea had the bomb. Iran was working pretty well toward the bomb. Iraq was maybe just getting going. Guess who got attacked? Iraq. Okay, all right. Notice, one of the lessons is if you want to make sure the United States doesn't bomb you, develop atomic weapons, right? So, well, they didn't get hit. Okay? On the other hand, another important idea is don't have too much in the way of natural resources because there's nothing. This is a fairly wealthy country mineral-wise, But on the other hand, there's not a lot of oil, whereas Iraq and Iran both have oil, and that's always an interesting target. Okay? Well, anyway, the key point is that this was the last war where our army was our army, and their army was their army, and everybody was able to shoot each other, and this is very nice, and we can understand what we're doing. Okay? And again, it's still every so often little shots of things take over. That war had a very big influence on another part of the world that really matters, and that is when the Chinese communists took over China. Okay, Chiang Kai-shek, Jiang Zemin, was crushed, and he retreated to the island of Formosa over here, which is Taiwan. Okay, which at that point everybody felt it was just a matter of when the Chinese were going to pick up the rest of that. Okay, instead, since we got involved in Korea, suddenly it became useful to have Taiwan, and so the United States starts to help Chiang Kai-shek again. Again, we had given him millions and millions and millions of dollars. Okay, he blew it. He was a stupid jerk. I recommend you read Barbara Tuchman's book, General Stilwell in China. General Stilwell was an American general who went there to help Chiang Kai-shek out, and he wound up calling him the peanut. He was afraid to do anything. He just kept holding on to his little toys instead of fighting his armies. Okay, using his armies to fight the other side. Anyway, with the aid that we gave Taiwan, it became very important industrially, because today a lot of semiconductor chips and stuff like that are made in Taiwan, and Taiwan has become another very powerful industrial country. So South Korea, these are called the Asian tigers. Okay, South Korea is one of them. Taiwan is another one, and the island of Singapore over here also has become extremely wealthy, and mainly because you have a lot of very hard-working people. Okay? I hope I mentioned, but if I didn't, I'm going to mention right now. One of the ironies of Western civilization is our system is based on capitalism. And what's the essence of capitalism?
Making money.
Making money, right. And what are you supposed to do with the money you make?
Invest it.
Invest it, that's right, okay? Instead, we've become the #1 consumer society in the world, so we're spending money as fast as we can, okay? Well, these guys don't do that. The Koreans, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Singaporeans, they save their money and they invest it, and wages are quite limited, and they're investing it in rebuilding and building factories and things like that. So I mean, they're really moving ahead. Okay, we are kind of post-capitalist. We're after the capitalist world. We're spending all of our money. Okay, well, the long-term picture for that is not too good. Okay, so gotta think about that. All right. Well, anyway, the point is that this is setting us up for the domino theory. So North Korea has fallen, and China has fallen, and now Vietnam is up in the air. And I believe that we left off, we were discussing Vietnam, right? You want to talk about the domino theory? We all understand what the domino
That's where
theory
you
is?
ended.
No.
Yeah,
you
domino.
just-
Yeah.
Yeah, and we explained what it was, right?
No.
No.
Oh, all right. Okay, you know what dominoes are? Okay, right. Sometimes you see these on TV where this whole setup of dominoes is all these dominoes in a row, and it's very intricate and goes off in different directions. And then I press this, and very dramatic, very long. Okay, all right. Well, that's the theory over here. Okay, you look at Russia, and then the first domino to fall was China. And the next domino was North Korea, and then the next domino is going to be North Vietnam, which became communist in 1954. And then they started invading South Vietnam. That's going to be the next domino. You think they're going to stop there? No, they're going to go into Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, Burma, Malaya, Singapore, Indonesia, eventually Australia. That really matters. India. So it's this row of dominoes, and eventually it's going to stop at the United States, which means you're going to be fighting communism in the United States. Okay? Well, if you're going to have to fight them here, isn't there a better place to fight them?
Mm-hmm.
Where?
Anywhere else?
All right. Notice if you stop them here, okay, then you've already made it. So you've saved all of that. And of course, people are also thinking very much in terms of the start of World War II. What happened at the start of World War II? That is to say, what happened in the 1930s?
You start from here.
Huh? Well, why don't we think about Hitler and what he did? What's the first thing he did? I don't care if it's crazy or not, but as far as,
He
What do you-
needed to get the country out of depression.
okay, so he's got his army built now.
Yep.
All right, but internationally, what did he do?
Annexed Austria.
Annexed Austria, good. All right, the next thing he did after that was?
They did Poland.
Well, there was a step before that.
Oh, Czechoslovakia.
All right, the Sudetendeutsch, and then he took the rest of Czechoslovakia. You see how that's just a bunch of dominoes? And then came Poland, okay? And then came France, and then came Norway, Denmark, all those places finally came. Well, they wound up fighting him in Moscow and in London. Maybe it might have been smarter to have fought him in Vienna, which is the capital of Austria, okay? So it's that same thinking, stop them now, okay? The word appeasement is a word that you will hear even now as, oh, this is horrible, okay? On the other hand, countries and people do get along by compromising. But the question is, when is the compromise going to be such that, you're happy, I'm happy, okay, we go with it, I didn't get 100%, you didn't get 100%? Or by giving you some of it, am I just setting up to go and get more? And, it's a very complicated issue that words like appeasement just, blind us because we're not thinking anymore, it's just automatically, this is black, this is white, okay, right. So anyway, the domino theory, right? What was supposed to happen in Vietnam was that after a year, I think you have a better map. Well, I don't only need that map for that domino effect and that, but somewhere here, you have, and that's what Vietnam. By the way, because there was no real victory in Vietnam, in Korea, that's tended to be called the Forgotten War, where people came back and, okay, that's fine, so what? And in a way, that's kind of a shame, because those are people who fought for their countries, some of them died for their countries.
Wasn't that the most horrific war that we've ever been involved in?
Korea?
Yeah.
Not especially, no. Vietnam is much worse. I
There
think,
wasn't as many deaths.
and I don't believe there were near as many deaths either. Okay, 898 is what we're looking at. I'm not sure, okay, but I believe that, when people talk about terrible wars, it's Vietnam that tends to get their focus. Yeah, if you look on 898, there's Vietnam. Okay, all right. So, in 1954, the French had finally been beaten and they agreed to pull out. Okay? At that point, all three of those countries there, Laos, Cambodia, and North and South Vietnam, had been called French Indochina. Okay? Indo-China, India, and China. Okay? Now instead, the three countries are seen as independent. Laos, very still back in the 1700s. Okay? Cambodia, a little more advanced than that. Vietnam, the most advanced. Okay. Anyway, the line was drawn, but there was supposed to be an election a year later, where the North, which actually had about 11 million people, would probably outpoll the South, which had about 10 million people. And in addition, the leader of the North was Ho Chi Minh, who was the George Washington of the country. He was one of the fighting since the Treaty of Versailles. I think I mentioned that last time, for an independent Vietnam. He had fought against the Japanese. He had fought against the French. So in a way, he was the national hero. Okay? However, there was a serious problem, and that is because the French had ruled that for over 100 years, the French are Catholic, and they had brought missionaries, and about 10% of the population of Vietnam was Catholic, and they were extremely opposed to being part of the communist world. Okay? Communism and Catholicism kind of, communism stands for there was no God. Catholicism, it's all about God, okay? So there was a very big tension on that. Anyway, many of the North Vietnamese Catholics, especially those around the capital city, Hanoi, notice up at the top, okay, actually moved to South Vietnam and started to try to rebuild their society down there, right? The French expected to, they wash their hands, that's the end of that, they don't care what's going to happen. But in the United States, the Eisenhower administration felt this domino theory idea. And so we began to back a leader for South Vietnam that we thought would be able to put that country together and make it a democratic state. And the person that we chose was named Diem, D-I-E-M. Okay? South Vietnam. Diem was a very cold, aristocratic figure. Okay. In addition, he was Catholic. He was pretty clean, but he had relatives who were very corrupt. Okay? And so the result is he favors the Catholics. Which irritates the Buddhists and hates. By far the large majority. Plus there was corruption. Eisenhower had sent in military advisors to their army. Okay? That means our guys come up and they're going to train your soldiers to fight. We are not involved in the fighting. We're just there to instruct you. Okay. Kennedy increased the number of those advisors. Okay. Kennedy succeeded Eisenhower as president in 1961. Okay. Kennedy also felt that one of the problems with Eisenhower was that Eisenhower had developed the policy of the ICBMs. Okay. So in the Cold War, remember that one of our problems as far as Eastern Europe going communist was that the Russians had their 3 million men there and our men had all come home, okay? Well, you could raise another army, but armies are expensive. You have to support all those people. Instead, we built a whole bunch of ICBMs, and if the Russians dared to attack, we would bomb the hell out of Russia, okay? Well, that's a very nice idea, but in 1956, the Russians did crush a revolution in Hungary, okay? And the question then arises, fine, do we want to use these ICBMs to stop that revolution? So are you willing to blow up Moscow and Leningrad and the other big Russian cities? And guess what they're going to be doing when you bomb them? They're going to be blowing up New York and Washington and Chicago. Are you willing to have World War III because of a tiny country, Hungary? Okay? And so in a way, you look like a powerless giant. You got all these things, but you can't use it. Okay? And so the result is that it sort of doesn't work for small problems. And the result is that when Kennedy becomes president, that's JFK, he sets up the Green Berets, which are kind of like crack troops. But especially this was good against guerrillas. So we got that. Kennedy increases the number of advisors, but Kennedy also starts to feel that you can't win if you don't have the people on your side. That's the whole secret of a guerrilla war. Okay, the people have to be committed to you because again, guerrilla war. I'm running on the board and somebody throws a spitball at me, and I turn around and say, "Who did that?" Nobody confesses. Certainly, the person who threw it didn't. Well, if you people really, want me to teach, and you're crazy about the class, and this was just a stupid interruption, somebody might say to me later on, you know, keep your eye on, you know, Holly over there because, you know, that's likely your source, okay? If I have that information, I have no problem, you know, going out with teaching, you're happy, things move along. But if you know, anybody, when was the last time anybody here reported somebody cheating on a test? Yeah. I mean, don't you see cheating happening?
No.
Well, I'm in a class right now where I know somebody cheated because one of the other students told me that this person during the test had her little those things out wrong, okay? The little computers that your iPhone or whatever it is, okay? And she was asking other people for answers, okay? Well, I did not see that, but I asked some of the other students in the class individually, did you see anything going on? Oh no, I didn't see anything, no. And it's the student code, okay? Well, I mean, who's being robbed? Basically, you are, okay? You know, we tend not to get involved, and same thing in guerrilla war, okay? If you will not say, well, you know, that person over there is the one who's you know, screwing everything up and who is you know, the enemy of all of us, if you don't feel involved, okay? You can't stop that. The only way that I could stop this is to have another teacher in the class or teacher's aide standing in the back watching. Militarily, it's been shown that to win a guerrilla war, you need about 10 times more soldiers than the guerrillas. The only guerrilla war, really, that's ever been won was by the British in Malaya. It took them like 10 years, okay, and a huge number of soldiers. Okay, you really have to swamp those situations, right? And you know, that kind of, it's a very difficult thing to operate. So you got to have the people on your side. 90% of you are Buddhists. I'm Catholic, and these three over here are Catholic, and I give them all the plums. Okay, what do you people think about my government?
It sucks.
Right, okay, and that's what's going on here. And so Kennedy agreed that Diem would have to go. There was a coup, and Diem, the idea was that he was supposed to be sent out of the country and into exile. Instead, he was killed, and the South Vietnamese army named one of its generals, Thieu, as the new head of the country. Now it becomes kind of a military state. There was also something called the Strategic Hamlets Program, okay? You know, you're all farmers, you're out on your fields, and that's too spread out to protect you, okay? So the Diem government with American advisors decided the best thing to do would be to require you all to live in villages. So during the day, you go out to your farms, but at night you all come out into the villages where we can protect you. Well, notice we're disrupting your whole way of life, and you know, you're just a farmer. You don't, you know, you've always farmed, so always somebody came along and took your taxes, but you know, you don't really understand the mechanism of democracy. All you know is that, you know, I'm disrupted in my life. So that wound up backfiring. It was not very popular with the people, and so we're kind of not doing well, right? But unfortunately, on November 22nd, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated. Now, Kennedy, we talked already about the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Okay, right. Now, Kennedy had a pretty good head. He was able to, you know, clear the board and think as opposed to just doing what he did before, okay? Maybe, we don't know, this is one of those big ifs in history. We don't know if Kennedy might have said, you know, this is, first thing, this whole domino theory is sort of foolish, okay? And second thing, you know, if the people don't care, if they don't understand about democracy, you know, what are they going to, how can we possibly train them to be something that's going to take decades for them to learn, if they'll ever learn? Does this give any reminder of something more recent? What? Afghanistan. Why did Bush go into Afghanistan?
Oil.
There's no oil in Afghanistan.
Nuclear weapons.
First thing, to get Osama bin Laden. Okay, that's fine, okay? And second thing, once we're there,
To make it a democracy.
to make it a democracy, to teach them democracy, this is great, okay? These are called the neocons, okay? The neoconservatives were people who felt that if you just teach people about democracy, same thing in Iraq, by the way. Saddam Hussein is the dictator, go in, get rid of him, make Iraq a democracy. When Iraq is a democracy, there is a statistic, and on the whole, democracies tend to fight less than other countries, okay? So make Iraq a democracy, and when the rest of the Arab world sees how wonderful democracy is, they will become democratic countries. Because they're democratic countries, they will not fight with Israel, which is a democratic country, and everything is happy, okay? Now this is pipe dreams. It was just a stupid idea. It didn't seem so stupid back then, but you know, if you stop and think, you know, it's very hard for people to give up their traditions. The reason I started with the Industrial Revolution in this class this morning is that notice it took the West something like 250 years to get to where we are, okay? So we're all gonna clap our hands, and other parts of the world are suddenly gonna go into the 20th century, okay? Technology is easy to do. I mean, you know, all of you seem to be writing with ballpoint pens. You know, that's a relatively new technology. Okay, I remember, you know, I used to write with a fountain pen when I was, you know, your age in college, okay, in high school too. Yeah, that's all. Well, that's easy for a person to do. But how do you get away from your internal ideas? You know, what is our value system? How important is God? What about the idea of respecting other religions? Ideas like that. You know, what about, you know, right now in Afghanistan, if a woman gets raped, okay, guess what happens to her? Why?
Because it's a disgrace to her family.
And also something else. She had sex with another man, okay? So I raped you, and you get killed because you had sex with another man, okay? Nothing happens to me, of course. Well, how do you undo things like that? How do you unwrap centuries and centuries of a tradition?
Bombs.
Well, in Vietnam,
That's the
that
next
was one
Hitler over
proposal.
there. She's gonna start ethnic cleansing.
All right, I'll get to them. All right, I mean, notice that's the problem. It's not winning wars, it's not shooting people, that's easy. It's how do you change what's going on in their heads? And next question, of course, do you have the right to change what's going on in their heads?
No.
Or
No.
do you deal by a, well, I mean, it certainly wouldn't be a lot better if they believe that a woman who has been raped has been, you know, maltreated, violated, right? And that the rapist is the one who ought to be punished?
But that's their
You can
culture. We have
introduce-
no business telling them that. And if it's that big of a deal, just bomb it.
Leaving out the bombing, okay? Do you women think that, you know, I mean, hell, women in Afghanistan, that's their problem.
No.
I mean,
it's-
yes and no, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
think that
See, they're not easy issues. I
the
mean,
compassionate, sympathetic part of you is like, oh my god, that's so terrible. But then the other part of you is like, how many people can you save? You know what I mean?
I think instead of going in there telling them, you know, change your whole life around, I mean, maybe they should provide funding for schools so these people can get educated in other ways.
well, in
other
Afghanistan, we
cultures.
have provided funding for schools, and the result is that when the Taliban comes in, those of you girls who went to school have a good chance of being killed, because your job was to stay home, okay? A woman's place is in the home, and you should not come
I
out.
think
If
what's
they
nicer
can't
than
control what the
right.
teachers are
Right.
teaching, they can still teach the same beliefs that all
Right.
of those children get taught by their parents or outside or wherever.
Well, just the fact that they went outside of their house is bad, okay? Second thing, Saudi Arabia, which is theoretically our ally, has spent a lot of money backing very conservative religious schools, and they call it the Wasabi sect, and it's very strict Islam. It's the burqa and all that sort of stuff. They gave that sort of as the price of not having problems inside their own country. So we will follow strict religious rules, and you let the Saudi Arabian family, which is quite large, and which kind of included Osama bin Laden, okay? You let us take care of the money and then live happily ever after as princes, and we'll let you, run these schools. And then those schools were built in a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, including Pakistan and Afghanistan. Okay, so I mean, schools are a help, but mainly they're for boys to learn. By the way, the method is very simple. Okay, you learn to memorize the Quran, which is in Arabic. Okay, do you speak Arabic? No. But in the course of time, as you're memorizing, you will make some connections, and eventually you'll have a grasp of Arabic. Okay?
But it's just like with us, we weren't always allowed to be in school.
That's right. Accepting that you right now have gone through 250 years of change, development, approaches.
So maybe they're just doing
One of
it
the
as
points that I need to make today, by the way, in my plan for this class, is the death of Western Christianity. Christianity is on its way out. Okay. Well, yeah, that's because you've had all this science and all this stuff, okay? Other people are nowhere near on that line, so, where do you go? I mean, these are tough issues.
How do you decide who you're gonna save and who you're not? What
Well,
about
who do
in
you decide in the
Africa,
first
how
place?
there's like genocide
Well-
across the
Well,
board?
and in Africa.
But we're not there.
Well, we
So-
are in certain parts. I mean, you were saying that statistically it's shown that once you set up a democracy or whatever, isn't it Mali right now that's like they just had an uprising, they overthrew their president.
Well, I mean, you gotta understand, set up a democracy doesn't mean clap, 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 now you have a democracy.
Well,
you
no, but they were regarded.
You need to internalize those
Right.
things, so that you are the leader of the party that's in right now, and there's an election, you might
Yeah.
know that, like 6 months ago, there was an election in, I think it was, Senegal, okay? I think it was Senegal, where, the guy who was president lost the election and said the election was invalid. And, there was like 6 months over there of fighting until finally he was captured and now he's on trial in international court.
But
Okay?
they were
But
saying
the
that.
point is, you need to say, as winner of the, as the guy who's in there,
Right.
okay, there's gonna be an election, and if I lose, I get out and they come in. One of the really most important moments in American history was when Thomas Jefferson was elected, because Jefferson was the first of the Democrats to be elected president, and the older party, the Federalists, John Adams, okay, accepted it. And you had a change of administration. That doesn't happen in most countries, okay? Democracy is great, let's all vote, so long as the votes come out that I'm reelected.
Well, they didn't even make it to their election. I mean, they were saying that I guess this country was seen up until this point as a democratic success, and that the election was supposed to be held at the end of April or something, and a bunch of people were pissed off because a bunch of fighters had fought for Gaddafi and then came back, and they were heavily armed, and so I mean, I guess they were a colony of France. They were saying originally they were a French colony, and even France has condemned them now. The United States has cut off government aid and military aid. But, so, are they gonna go back to the way they were?
It
And now
takes a
they're
long
such a
time to
democracy
establish
gone?
a tradition of these kinds of things. I mean, there were people in the United States who, when Bush v. Gore came up, where, obviously Gore won in Florida and yet the Supreme Court stops the count, okay? There are people who said, we ought to, arrest the Supreme Court and, shoot them, okay? But here it's, well, I mean, after all, the Supreme Court gave the election to Bush. And again, it was a heavily Republican Supreme Court, surprised that the Republicans won it, okay? So, I mean, the point is, it takes that long tradition that even we have, we have a tiny fringe that says even though the Supreme Court said if they're wrong, we're gonna go ahead and revolt, okay? Whereas over there, quite a lot of people are involved. And do not forget that, not too many of us really think of the government as our main source of income, but in a lot of these places, if you're in the Army, it's the government that's taking care of you, right? So you wanna watch out which government is in there. So, these are tough issues. It's easy for us to judge.
Once you leave them alone, they're gonna catch up.
How long will it take?
Hey, it's up to them.
Yeah,
And there's the question.
But there's the thing that they can't go in there and assume, like us, we're kind of okay because of like all the things that the presidents have done. There's programs set in place, there's things for seniors, there's things for poor people, there's things for everybody. You can't just go in one of these countries and like,
But
you have to learn
there's to
this.
police everybody.
Yeah, I'm like, it just doesn't make sense. What's right for me isn't necessarily right for you.
Because of
I
what
can't
you were
ins-
taught and how you
Exactly.
were raised. So
And
if
my
you bring that-
history and my culture comes from
We'll just go
here, and yours might
Yeah.
come from over there. I can't tell you to stop living your way and live my way, because who am I to tell you that what's right, what I'm doing is right? I might be wrong.
So nobody over here is a Jehovah's Witness? Did you go and knock on people's doors and?
I have a lot of relatives, and I'm not converting anytime soon.
Yeah, you may not, but do you see that those people are trying to help you?
They're
Don't
trying
try
to
to have-
spread religion.
Yeah, like they believe that they have the right answer. I mean, isn't there?
But it's a
really trying
choice to shut the door.
Yeah, all right. Well, the point is,
Say thank you, but no thank
The
you.
point is-
Right.
most of people in the West tend to think the system is really good and you guys ought to adopt it. And to what degree do you want to say, okay, not only you ought to, but you really got to? Okay? So I mean, you'll have different people pushing different things, in different countries at different times, some group or other. I mean, Bush was very militant as far as spreading American ideas. It wasn't that he was saying, how can I screw the world? Okay? It's that he was really trying to help Afghanistan. Okay? And somehow it didn't work. I'm not so sure he was so pure-hearted in Iran, I'm sure in Iraq, but, okay. Well, anyway,
Yeah,
the
heroin.
point is that Kennedy is assassinated, and in comes Lyndon Johnson, who was a Texan and who was sort of, he really was a great lover of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay? And he wanted to do great things in the United States, okay? But at the same time, he also felt that the United States had a duty to help Vietnam, okay? How could we let this country go communist? It sounds like a terrible idea. We are the most powerful country in the world, okay? Vietnam is a pipsqueak, okay? Surely we can save the South. And so he listened to his generals. The military on the whole, remember what I said, that in Malaya, if you had 10 times as many soldiers as you guerrillas, you're very likely to win, okay? The military asked for 50,000 troops. That should do it. Okay, fine. We go in. It's a mission creep type deal, okay? So, you've got the Vietnamese are out there fighting, and here we set up an air base to give them sort of air coverage and a sense of what's happening, okay? But, again, this is now guerrilla war, and guerrilla war in the middle of the night, some of these guerrillas have snuck through they're not formal lines, they're just troops going out in different directions, okay? And they shoot at your base. Now, are American soldiers supposed to sit there and say, hi, I'm only here to help the Vietnamese, I'm not actually in this war? No, shouldn't they be entitled to shoot back? Okay. Well, if you're going to shoot back here, all right, are you going to wait until they're able to shoot the planes? Maybe you want to kind of be out there and notice what's happening. Mission creep, little by little, you're moving deeper and deeper, and suddenly it's your war as well as their war, okay? Anyway, the American military fell 50,000 men. Turns out that wasn't quite enough, so maybe we'd have more and more and more, until by 1965, there were 565,000 American troops fighting in Vietnam, and it had become our war, okay? This was also the first war covered on television, okay? Little cameras, Walter Cronkite actually went there, Dan Rather, people like that, names you may vaguely remember, Tom Brokaw. Well, what was it like out there today? Well, it was really a mess. I mean, we shot and, we think we may have killed some people, but we're not sure. Slogging through the stuff. My legs were covered with leeches. This is jungle fighting, okay? The Vietnamese were brilliant in their fighting. For example, this is a path, and it looks like there's a bunch of leaves there, and I step on it, and actually there's a hole there with stakes pointing up. The stakes have been dipped in human excrement, okay? And you get a nice dig like that into you, it's going to be a pretty terrible infection, okay? Plus the natural insects and all this other stuff over there, mosquitoes. It's very frustrating. Plus I go out and I have now arrived in your village, and thank heavens, freedom, democracy, the American way of life is here. Isn't this great? Who loves us? Everybody loves us, okay? Now, hooray. And 2 days later, somebody from this village is taking a shot at our people, okay? Now I come back and I say, who did it? Who did it? Who did it? Nobody knows. Well, then I can, again, the same thing happens until finally sometimes people snap and, okay, you dirty bastard, bug, 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 and that's the end of you all, okay?
Well, they also use women and children to kind of pretend to
Right.
to sucker
Yes.
Americans in, and then
A little kid comes over, you lift the little kid and a grenade goes off and you're dead, okay? Again, these people are not fighting a nice war, okay? They're fighting to, Rick over there is going to fight me. So I say, put up your dukes, this is fine, okay? He's got all the advantages. I'm going to kick him in the balls. Well, if I don't, I'm going to lose, okay? You have the greatest army in the world. What do I have? Nothing, okay? Which means I have to fight dirty. My job is to save my country, not to be a good sport and go down losing, okay? So the war becomes very frustrating back home, okay? It's a war where America had the draft, and so young men of 18 years of age and older, you had to register for the draft. This is still left over from World War II, okay? And then you get called up, right? Well, you know, I mean, you really want to go to fight in the swamp somewhere? And, you know, some people, yay, this is great, we need to fight for our country, you know, I'm gung-ho. Gung-ho means I'm really enthusiastic about it, that's fine. But others aren't so enthusiastic, and then you start to get, well, you know, we don't want all of our guys to go, so there ought to be some who don't go, and you get draft deferments. Deferment means your time is put off, okay? So when I was in college, this is about my time, okay? When I was in college, I had a draft deferment because I was in college, okay? People who did not go to college, got out of high school, off they went, you know, some of them, if their draft numbers came up, to Vietnam. Then they decided they needed more people, and so they raised what was required. And so instead of being in college, it was in college and you also married, okay? So some guys got married, okay? Then it got to be if you also had kids, okay? If you're the only son in your family, because you know you might get killed and have none of that, okay? So there's all these deferments going on, okay? Yeah, and it becomes, if you're white, college educated, in the right places, fair amount of money, you can kind of decide whether you want to go or not. But if you're poor white or poor black, okay, all right, okay. At the war itself, you know, the war was a very strange war. American soldiers, for every one soldier actually with a gun marching through the swamp, there were 9 soldiers behind him, okay, in things like, so you could have a hot meal every night, okay, so people were cooking and wrapping these things up, flying them out to you. The artillery, of course, they're pretty safe, but nonetheless, they're, you know, they're out there. So, I mean, there's a huge army of which 10% was actually doing much of the fighting, okay? Great complaints over there. The nature of the war was much different from, again, World War II or Korea, where I could see you, you could see me. The war was basically a lot of sitting around and then moments of absolute terror. So, you know, all day long we're sitting around doing nothing, and suddenly at night I'm in a little outpost somewhere and I can hear sounds out there and I don't know if I'm, you know, what I'm hearing, okay? In the library on reserve, there's a book by Philip Caputo called A Rumor of War. I actually have made assignments in it sometimes, but here, if you're interested, go in, you know, just read a chapter or two in it. It's at the you know, just go to the desk and ask for it, it's there, okay? You know, sitting around all day long, when you sit around all day long, you get bored, okay? What's available for us to have a little fun? Well, there's plenty of marijuana, hashish, cocaine, women, etc., okay? Americans have a lot of money, and don't, I mean, hell, this thing costs you 10 cents, and I want it, and I'll pay $10 for it, no problem, okay? The Vietnamese economy completely falls apart, it becomes totally dependent on the United States, okay? And so, in many ways, we're kind of destroying not only the country, but also ourselves. I mean, I know people who went to Vietnam and came back as addicts, okay? And there's also the problem of, again, you know, went out to that village or something just like it, day after day, we're plowing the sea. And you know what? One fine afternoon, we were going out doing this little march, my buddy over here got shot and killed, okay? What seems to be the purpose of this? There is no purpose. And something called fragging actually develops. And that is, you know, this big F word, second lieutenant who was out to build a career, you know, he just came out of West Point or something, he's really hot and all that sort of stuff, and he's going to lead us into the jungle so we can be heroes, okay? Well, we go into the jungle, and lo and behold, somebody shoots him, and I mean us, okay? So literally, some of our own leaders get shot by their people, okay? Meanwhile, you've got the generals who, okay, we're out into this patrol, and we thought we heard noises, better send in some planes to help us. So planes come in and bomb all that area, okay? And finally we walk in, and did anybody find anything? Oh yeah, we found a dead guy. He must be the enemy, okay? So, okay, we had one enemy killed. When you report the one enemy killed, you know, we spent $500,000 on bombs, and you bring back one enemy killed. Are you sure there weren't more out there? Okay, fine, there were 10 enemy killed, okay? And you would hear on the news night after night, this many enemy were killed yesterday, this many enemy. They're being killed left and right. But you're escaping reality, okay? Nobody really knows what's going on. There's a book out right now by someone I can't remember. He wrote a book called Matterhorn, and this thing is something about, the title is something like why I hated, it starts with why I hated my service in Vietnam, okay? And he was a person who was, also Phil Caputo was Catholic, okay? And the Catholics were, especially, we need to save the world against godless communism, okay? This guy, I think, also was Catholic. This guy's name starts with K, okay? And in both cases, there are people who thought the war was a great idea. Yes, we need to go and fight and protect these people and stop godless communism. But as the time went by over there, they both turned around and eventually both wound up thinking the war was a terrible idea. Caputo actually, I think he actually becomes a deserter. Okay, the other guy served his time. When he came back to America, in America, so many people had started to protest against the war. College professors. You see those two guys back there? Okay, they sit there all during this class. They don't do anything, and they're saying today nothing. Okay, if I give them an F, what am I doing? Huh?
If they
Sending
don't
a
do
message.
anything, like they don't, you're targeting them.
What happens when you get Fs in college?
Drop out.
You flunk out. And what happens when you flunk out?
You get drafted.
You go to the war.
So I can't fail school.
So these people, get. I'm going to send them. You get at least a C just for being there. Okay. Well, I mean, literally, I was going to send these kids to maybe get killed. Okay. And that leaks right through. Meanwhile, other young men who are thinking they have friends in Vietnam. They're like, well, I grew up in East Hartford and I went to college, but not all my friends did. Okay. Protests begin against the draft. Okay. Things like, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? Okay? The protests sometimes become quite violent. Okay. The society as a whole breaks down. Okay. Some people start to think that this is the war that's not making sense. We went there to save Vietnam. What are we doing? We're bombing it left and right. Okay. One of the problems is those swamps, and we developed Agent Orange. Agent Orange is a chemical that defoliates everything, and so we cover vast areas of Vietnam. We have B-52s, huge planes, that just cover the thing with this defoliant, and all the leaves die on the trees. But on the other hand, guess who's going into those trees now? We are. Okay. So there's all kinds of questions on that. Morally, we went to do the right thing. Doing the right thing, does this make sense? Is the cure worse than the cause? Okay? In 1964, Johnson runs for election as president. He had taken over from Kennedy. Now he's got 4 years of his own. Okay? And the opponent is Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater is the first extreme conservative, and he says we should just drop the atomic bomb all over Vietnam. Well, if we kill everybody there, we will have won the war. But what are we doing there? Well, Johnson wins by a huge majority. Goldwater carries 2 states, and Johnson carries the rest. But Johnson interprets that as people are in favor of our continuing the war, and so the escalation really goes on. And you keep hearing every night, we're doing great. And then we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. That phrase is repeated over and over again. The light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, you can see we're making progress, and we're going to get there, right? The killings continue. The occasional things like the My Lai massacre, where a lieutenant with his troops goes in and slaughters a whole village of women and children. It's the frustration that builds up. Okay, it's easy for us to say that's horrible. But we weren't the guys marching through those swamps where your buddy got killed, and you might be the next one dead, and you just snap. This guy in Afghanistan who just shot 16 people. Okay, obviously he snapped. Okay, well, to what degree is the country putting soldiers in a position where they might snap?
4 tours of duty is a little bit much.
But he snapped.
Right.
His wife says he didn't do it.
There's another guy that committed suicide when he was going to be deployed for the 8th time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the number of suicides
They
in
should
Ireland
have a
today
cap on
is
the amount.
very
Yeah,
high.
absolutely.
Because
But on the other
post-traumatic stress
hand,
is crazy.
do you want to be a great power? If you want to be a great power, you need to have soldiers.
I mean,
And that
there's other
means-
people that I've seen people that, they can try with new soldiers, but I mean, deployments, I think 2 is excessive.
I'm not going
I
to
think
Afghanistan.
anything over 2 is excessive.
What?
Why
Listen,
would I go to Afghanistan? What am I gonna get out of it?
You don't have
a bullet, what do you want, everything? Don't you wanna help your country?
No, not, that's not.
That was
What
what
are we getting done right now?
All right,
Why can't we help ourselves and just pull out and say enough is enough?
do you like being in a democracy?
Yeah.
All right, does the majority rule?
She likes following people.
Yeah, you should rule.
Bush was elected president and re-elected president,
Yeah.
okay? And when he was re-elected, the war in Afghanistan had been going on for 3 years, and Iraq had been going on for 3 years, and the majority of your fellow Americans felt the war should keep going because they voted for him.
But
That's
really,
Because they're looking for
he
good
really
luck.
kinda,
He won that election
came up
by,
again after the 9/11 thing. After the 9/11, that kind of, should I say, pushed for his re-election because of the way he had kind of.
Yeah, but after 9/11, he went into Afghanistan and then into Iraq, and then came the election. And so, you know, people could have voted him out. By the way, it was the Catholic vote that put him in, okay? The key state was Ohio, and on the Ohio ballot, the Republicans are very clever. They really are. They're much better at strategy than the Democrats are. No, I mean, look, I mean, you play your cards. I mean, if I'm playing cards with you, I mean, I'm gonna play my cards as best I can, all right? I believe that I should win because I like me, okay? Anyway, the point is, the Republicans arranged that on the ballot in Ohio, there was a gay marriage bill, and all the Catholics shit their pants on that one, and you know, they all voted against it, okay? And that's how Bush won. Okay? It was a very close election, okay? Well,
Bush is a
okay,
great
fine.
Catholic.
Well, no, it's that Bush is conservative, and we
Most
our
war
values are
presidents are.
threatened, and, there we are. Okay, I mean, you gotta be honest. It's not that anybody runs for president because he's out to do bad things. But the point is, what I think is good for the country, and what you think is good for the country, is going to be different. It's same there and there and there. If you're in a democracy, the price of democracy is when the majority says something you don't like, you need to go home until the next election. And so therefore, Rick, you need to go to Afghanistan. And I'm going to fail you in this course. You won't be able to draft it.
and billions and billions of
Notice
dollars
it pays
are
to be quiet. I
wasted.
don't have to fail him. I don't know what he's
And we wonder why there's people going hungry in this country, because we're wasting money elsewhere.
Nothing is ever perfect, so, all right. By the way, you understand that I don't exactly endorse everything I say in here, okay? I mean, there are things that, I tend to take the other
Playing
side
devil's
because there are
advocate.
two sides, yeah, all right? And you ought to be aware of the other side, okay? I mean, I think that the war in Afghanistan, I think it's time to get out of there, for sure, okay? And the war in Iraq was just a fraud to begin with because
There was no weapons.
there was no weapons, and they knew there was no weapons.
Right.
Okay?
So it's all BS and they're all liars.
No, just.
So much for your bombing theory.
I think with the army, like the first one should be mandatory if you're drafted. Originally, it should, they told you. But I mean, anything after 2, I think it should be only if you voluntarily enlist.
Then your job is to contact your congressman, okay, and say that the United States should adopt that as a policy, that, you only get 2 tours of duty in any place that there's a hot war going on, and after that, rotate, okay? Another thing, I don't know if you like this, is, there are plenty of people around the world who'd be happy to fight, okay? So why don't we hire mercenaries? Let them do our fighting. So, I mean, if you wanna,
And we go pay them?
yeah, you're gonna pay them. Yeah. Okay. I mean, we'll make it a very largely mercenary army. Okay. If you're American, you want to go and fight, that's great. And if not, we hire and we get them cheaply too. Okay. There is a danger to that, of course.
They're gonna turn on us.
Well, that's possible. I mean, the Taliban, they were our allies against Osama bin Laden. We gave them. There's a movie called Charlie Wilson's War, which I really, really recommend. Okay. The Russians, at some point we've got to get to, moved into Afghanistan, okay? And when they did, they fought the Taliban, and we supplied the Taliban with these rockets that shoot down helicopters and stuff like that, which of course now they're using on us, okay? And Osama bin Laden was there too, and we supplied that group, okay? So there is a danger, all right? But you want everything, You even want to take a break. You're disgusting. I give up. You need need to vote.